Hey everybody, welcome to our next chapter of Jeopardy! This is going to be about social influence, and we're going to start with conformity. Suppose you are taking a friend to a party. The invitation specified that the party would begin at 6 o'clock. When you arrive at your friend's apartment at 5:45 to pick her up, she tells you she won't be ready to leave before about 6:30 and comments that nobody arrives on time anyway. Your friend is following a what is implicit social norm. So conformity for 200. According to Ash's experiments, why would an individual give in to group consensus even when it violates his or her personal beliefs? What is? Because most people believe that the majority is right, even when their own eyes tell them otherwise. Okay, conformity for 300. Even though we show conformity in the many contexts, we underestimate the extent to which others' actions influence us. This is particularly true in which type of cultures? What is individualistic cultures? In collectivist societies, conforming has no negative implications attached to it, so people are more willing to admit that they conform. Okay, conformity for 400. Jenna is hoping to become a member of a very exclusive club. Many of her friends are already members, and Jenna would do anything to gain acceptance into such an exclusive group. One night, Jenna is hanging out with many women who are already members of the club, and they suggest going skinny dipping in the town's public pool. Usually, Jenna would never consider doing something of this nature, but on this night, she agrees. Jenna's agreement is likely due to cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is the extent to which we're attracted to a particular social group and want to belong to it. 3 college friends went swimming in a local creek, ignoring both a no trespassing sign and a no swimming sign. These friends were violating injunctive norms. Injunctive norms are norms specifying what ought to be done, whereas descriptive norms simply indicate what people most do in a given situation. Okay, this is the second category of conformity for 100. Martha tells her friend June, "Didn't you hear that eating lots of garlic is good for you?" If June then changes her eating habits to include a lot of garlic, it would be due to what is informational social influence. This is social influence based on the desire to be correct. Jimmy considers himself to be an atheist and does not pray. However, he is dating a girl, Eileen, whose family is religious. He has never met her family before and wants to make a good impression when he does. On Thanksgiving, he goes to Eileen's family's house to meet them for the first time. Before the meal is served, the family bows their heads to pray. Jimmy follows along and even says amen at the end of the prayer. This change in Jimmy's behavior is due to what is normative social influence. This is social influence based on the desire to be liked or accepted by other people. Okay, conformity for 300. Zimbardo's prison study illustrated the importance of what factor in determining behavior? What is the situation? Zimbardo contended that the situation is more impactful than personality or personal traits. When are we more likely to conform? When we're engaged in synchronous behaviors or when we're observing others engaged in synchronous behaviors? What is when we're engaged in synchronous behaviors? So synchronous behaviors are behaviors in which individuals closely match their actions to those of others. And this is where there's the actor-observer effect is revisited. As actors, we experience the pressures to conform arising from group membership. As observers, we don't. Rather, we become sensitive to restrictions that synchronous behaviors exert on our personal freedom, and this is what is defined as reactance. And finally, conformity 2 for 500. What are 3 factors that encourage nonconformity? What is one's status within a group, their degree of power, and the desire to be unique? Okay, so now we're on the compliance category for 100. 2 years ago, Ursula loaned Katie $300, even though the two women didn't know each other very well. Now Ursula has approached Katie to ask if Katie can loan her $200. Katie says yes. Katie's compliance rests on the principle of reciprocity. So you want to be familiar with the 6 principles of compliance, which reciprocity is one of the 6. Okay, so compliance for 300. Compliance for 200. Pauline asked her neighbor Tom if he could watch her dog for a night because she had to go on an overnight business trip. Tom agreed. The next month, Pauline asked Tom if he could watch the dog for 2 nights, and Tom agreed. Then 2 months later, Pauline asked Tom if he could watch the dog for a week, and Tom agreed. Pauline was successful with getting compliance from Tom on her request due to the fact that she utilized the foot in the door technique. Okay, now this one's compliance for 300. Students living in dorms were asked if they would contribute $5 to a scholarship fund for underprivileged students, and in return, they would receive a free coupon for a free smoothie at a local juice bar. Once students agreed to make a donation, they were told that there were no more coupons and were asked if they would still contribute. The students agreed. This compliance technique is referred to as the lowball procedure technique. This is an offer which is changed to make it less attractive after the person has committed. Okay, compliance for 400. Sam has been working in the same position without any promotion or salary increase for 2 years. He currently makes $45,000 per year, but he thinks that someone with his experiences should make about $50,000. During his annual appraisal, he approaches the topic with his boss. Sam asks for $10,000 a year raise. His boss says that the current budget cannot support such an increase. Sam then asks for $5,000 a year raise, and his boss agrees. Which technique did Sam use to gain compliance from his boss? What is the door in the face technique? This is where a person begins with a large request, and then they retreat to a smaller one, which is the one that was actually desired. Okay, compliance for 500. When an auto dealer offers you an extra option as a closer for the dealer is using which compliance technique? What is the that's not all technique? This is the offer of additional benefits before the target person has decided to comply with the request. Okay, we're going to go for obedience for 100. All right, Mrs. Totten is a teacher at a middle school in New York City. One day, her students are acting very boisterously. Mrs. Totten quickly wraps a ruler on their desks and says, "Be quiet." Which type of social influence caused the students' behavior to change? What is obedience? What percentage of participants in Stanley Milgram's obedience study showed total obedience? What is 65% of participants? These results indicate that the pressures to obey in these types of situations are difficult to resist. So difficult that many people yield to this pressure, even if it means harming another person who's done nothing to harm them. Okay, obedience for 300. One reason that people are willing to obey persons in authority who order them to engage in destructive behaviors is that the authority figure relieves those who obey the responsibility for their actions. Persons in authority often possess visible signs for their status that remind us of the social norm for obedience to authorities. It allows the obedient person to escalate their tasks very gradually, and events move at a fast pace, giving people little time to consider their actions. Any one of those answer choices would be correct. Many atrocities have been committed because of a gradual escalation in the scope of demands given from a person in authority. This factor is closely related to which compliance technique? What is the foot in the door technique? So people in authority ask for small actions first, but ever larger ones later. For instance, in Milgram's study, participants initially gave small shocks, which escalated with continued sessions. Okay, obedience for 500. One way to help people become more resistant to commands from authorities that may lead to destructive behaviors is to, what is, there's 4 different answer choices here. We can remind people that they, not the authorities, are responsible for any harm done. Remind people that beyond some point, obedience is inappropriate. Encourage people to call the motives of the authority figure into question. Or increase people's knowledge of the findings of research on destructive obedience. Any one of these 4 answer choices would be correct. Okay, this is unintentional influence for 100. Imagine your roommate came home very angry because she was just fired from her job for being late. She storms off to her room, and as you sit down to study for your social psychology exam, you find yourself tense and anxious. What has just occurred? What is social contagion? Okay, unintentional influence for 200. You are watching that show Jackass, and you find yourself laughing despite the fact that people are repeatedly being shown getting hurt after participating in their inane antics. You are experiencing what? What is Schadenfreude? Schadenfreude is where we take satisfaction or pleasure at someone else's misfortune. Okay, unintentional influence for 300. What is the neural mechanism in our brains that may underlie our reactions to others' emotions? What are mirror neurons? These are neurons that respond as strongly when we're or when we observe another person's actions or expressions of emotion, as when we perform these actions and experience these emotions ourselves. They play a key role in empathy. Okay, unintentional influence for 400. Your best friend Natalie has recently warned you against giving anyone you don't know well a ride home from a party. Recently, you attended a party and spent the whole night reminiscing with other friends about the fun times you've all had with Natalie. Later, a stranger approaches you and asks you for a ride home. Because your relational schema is activated, you will most likely do what? What is refuse to give the stranger a ride? So this is like an example of the voice in your head that's your mom saying don't do something. So this is symbolic social influence, which is social influence resulting from the mental representation of others or our relationships with them. And finally, unintentional influence for 500. Frank hires a handyman to install drywall in a room he's renovating. Frank has always wanted to know how to do this himself, so he watches much of the work the handyman does and takes notes on the supplies needed and the procedures followed. The following year, Frank installs drywall in another room by himself. Frank was able to do this due to what is modeling. Modeling is a form of unintentional social influence, and it's also referred to as observational learning, which is a basic form of learning in which individuals acquire new forms of behavior as a result of observing others. And this concludes our social influence chapter.